Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Embree. I am the Director of Marketing here at Travel Media Group. I want to first thank everyone for taking the time to join me. This is our first ever review response masterclass for hotels and hotel groups. I am super excited to share this presentation with you all. Now, a few housekeeping items. At the end of the presentation, I will be providing my direct contact information in case you have any follow-up questions with the content that we're going to be sharing today. But we will also have a short live Q&A session at the end with both Jason and I. So use that chat feature located in your in your toolbar to type any sort of questions or feedback. Also be on the lookout since today's presentation will feature several interactive polls and would absolutely love your participation in them. So, as mentioned before, this is our first review response masterclass for hotels. We have done this earlier in the year for social media, and we got such a great response. We decided to do it for review response, which we know is just so important right now. And really the difference between, we've been doing these educational webinars for about 4 years now, but we've really started with these masterclasses. And the difference between that is really the subjective. By the end of this event, if both Jason and I do our jobs right, we will hopefully have demonstrated a comprehensive step-by-step strategy to leverage your hotel's review response as an influential piece of the traveler's booking journey. And this is so important right now because there really used to be two types of hotels when it came to review response: those who did it and those who didn't. And now in 2022, as we go practically 2023, there's a third bucket there, and those are the hotels that do it, that don't do it, and those that are able to leverage it as a competitive advantage and a marketing tool. And that is what we're going to focus on and learn today. So let's go ahead and look at our agenda. What are we going to be talking about? Well, first, let me go ahead and get on camera here. Again, hello, my name is Ryan Embree, Director of Marketing. First, we're going to start with connecting the dots with review responses. I'll explain that more in a minute. Then we're going to go through the 3 phases of review response. First is even before we put pen to paper or start typing on our computers that response, preparing to respond to guest feedback, creating your hotel's review response voice. Consistency is key here, especially with the staffing shortage. You might have had maybe 3 or 4 different people responding to your reviews on site now or even the course of the year. If you don't have a consistent voice, your guests and your travelers are going to see that, and it could impact conversion. Leveraging online review data and analytics. Jason specifically loves this part of the process, getting into all that good feedback and how we can leverage it to improve the hotel experience at our property. And finally, we're going to have that live Q&A session. But first, before we get started and rolling here, I am going to go ahead and launch first of our many polls. The first one is asking, what is your hotel or hotel group's review response strategy now, right? We respond to every single review. Hopefully, there's a lot of you on this. You're on a masterclass for review response. Hopefully, that's the case. There's some hotels out there that only respond to negative reviews, right? We've seen that before. We respond when we can. We know this is big. A hotelier's life 24/7. Or currently, we do not have a review response strategy. We are not shaming anyone if that is the case here. This is an anonymous poll, but this is the first step to that, getting on one of these things. So I'll go ahead and share the results here in a second. We can go ahead and look at that. So this is fantastic. This is what we love to see. And again, judging by the fact that we're on a masterclass right now, trying to respond to every single review, that's the ultimate goal. But we also have some people that respond when they can. So let's go ahead and jump into it here and talk about connecting the dots, right? So this is something that really changed when review response sites took away character limits. Now, after an 8-hour shift at the front desk or GMing or operating the property, you could come across a review like this on Google or some of your OTAs that says, great stay, 5-star review, this place is great, right? And you're probably thinking, oh, this is the easiest review to respond to. And you can just put something in here. There's not a lot of information in the review. Really doesn't have to be a lot in the response. But really, for hoteliers, this specific response should be really exciting for you. It is a blank canvas and a marketing opportunity for you to talk about what makes your property unique. You are only telling a little bit of the story if you use a small little response there. This is a great example here of telling and selling this hotel story, because that guest is essentially given you, the property, the mic, right? So this is where you can leverage that. And that's the difference between what I talked about, the hotels that are doing it and the hotels that are leveraging this as a tool and a conversion tactic. So this is a great job here, an example of them explaining very subtly, hey, with 5 different bars, lounges, and 2 restaurants and a nightclub, we aim to have something for everyone. It was a subtle little thing that they put in there, but it completed the story and connected the dots of what that great stay might have looked like, even though the guest didn't talk about this. This is how we are absorbing content now. You think about Netflix, Uber, Uber Eats, Rotten Tomatoes, I already mentioned Netflix, Uber. All these places have places where you can review these different different aspects of the apps. So this is how we're consuming the content. So important. Amazon, another huge one, right? So, as our first exercise for this masterclass, I would ask you after you get off here, a really good way of grading how well you or maybe your team is responding to your responses. Start backwards. Look at the response first, and then see, and then look at the review and see how well did I address every single topic. See if you can actually guess what that review is based on the response, and that will show you how well your team, yourself, are doing it, actually completing that story, connecting the dots that we talked about. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and bring in our Chief Technology Officer, Jason Lee. Jason, I'll give you a second to sign on, but we're going to start talking here about preparing to respond. I mentioned before, this is a 3-step process here, right? So right before we start typing, we start reviewing, there's a couple things we need to do. So Jason, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you and let you go ahead and, let me see here. Let me go ahead and give that to you, and I'll go ahead and you can go ahead and take us through.
Okay, great.
Hello, Jason, by the way, welcome to the masterclass.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay. So if you have a platform, if you're using us, then great. If you're using a brand platform, most of them have a review feed. So preparing for review response, I know this is going to sound kind of basic, but make sure that like everything we have at our properties, right, there is redundancy of process. So I have more than one person that can do something. So I don't just have one desk clerk or one housekeeper. I have more than one person because it's a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour business, right? So I think in this case, you also need the same thing. You need to have more than one person that can do this. So you have a process rather than I'm going to do this once a week every Wednesday, which never works out. So make sure you have a time, make sure you have a process, but more importantly, make sure you have people and that those people are all connected together. And so a way to connect everyone together would be through alerts. So most platforms have alerts. Make sure that those alerts are on. And make sure that the people that are getting those alerts are also the people that have access to the platform, but even probably more importantly, have access to the outlets that the reviews are coming from. So sometimes this is a credential issue, but make sure that that stuff is in line. So if we're handing over responsibility, we want to make sure they have all of the tools necessary to make sure that they can get those responses done. But I think that all of this goes into the most important part of this, which is a timely response. Right. So that if you don't have a process or you don't have a method to get this done, timely responses won't happen and things will fall through the cracks. So you want to make sure that you have all of this together. The next thing you want to do is, and this is like, again, this might go without saying, but we're all emotional people, right? We kind of flow through our day and things happen. It could be staffing issues. It could be an incident with a guest. It could be some bad news that I got on my fantasy football, whatever it is, right? But what you want to do is you want to get yourself into a space where you have a positive mental state, where you understand that what you're doing has ramifications not only to the guest that wrote the review, but also to future guests. So get yourself into that Zen space, right? Do whatever you need to do
Yeah.
before you start making those responses, and then get in there and start making those responses. The other thing I want to say is that as you start to make those responses, it's something really interesting that Ryan just showed, and that is he was showing the response first and see if you could match the response to the review. So often what we see is we see the review, and the review has a bunch of things in it, a bunch of information that a guest thoughtfully wrote. And in the case, in this case, there was positive and negative information, even though this is a 5-star review, right? So that information needs to be collected. You need to have a space where you can sit down and you can see, here are the positive things that this guest mentioned, and here's the places where we maybe could have improved. Before you start to create that response. And once you have all these pieces together, so right, I've got my alerts, I've got the right people, I've got my right headspace, then you can start crafting your responses.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a really important thing that and a great point that Jason brings up. And the reason that we do this, if your guest is starting to see trends within your review feed about, let's say, the pool not being there being some issue at your hotel pool, right? And you've got this 5-star review, your guest could be looking through these reviews on your feed, just looking for information on that pool and saying to themselves, obviously I've identified this as an issue at this property. There's a lot of different topics in this review, but what do they say about the pool? And is this a trend? Is this a pattern? So you never know what's important to your guests and to your travelers. So you need to make sure that you're organized and have all of those topics in place, whether it's something to the side, whether you're writing it on a piece of paper before you're actually responding, but you don't know what your guests are looking for or what's important to them. When you go into that data, you might have some ideas of that, but that's super, super important. And I think that feed does a fantastic job of showing that, Jason. So let's kind of recap what Jason went over. Setting up notification and organize users. This is going to set you up for timely responses. Identify issues quickly. So even if your people at the property are not doing the responses themselves, maybe have a platform where you can send a review to the director of housekeeping. So if there is an issue, that gets resolved quickly before the next guest, and you're not having to explain yourself, because guests are forgiving, but if they see that an issue is keep going on and you're not making those fixes, they're not going to be that forgiving. And then credential security, we come across it all the time with hotels that we work with. Front desk manager leaves, DOS leaves, and they bring the credentials with them. So make sure you got that. Identify guest sentiment. We covered that. Positive, neutral, negative. Make sure that's all taken care of and identified, and it's addressed in your response. And then what Jason said, very important. There's a time cost and emotional cost with this. We know both Jason and I have been behind that front desk on the operation side of things. After a long 8-hour, sometimes double shift, it's not the best mindset to get into when you've been talking to guests all day and trying to kind of defend yourself. So let's move into finding a response voice. So now we've prepped ourselves for the review response itself. Jason, I'm going to swing this back over to you, and you can kind of walk us through, what does that mean, finding a review response voice?
Yeah. So obviously, your property has its own kind of vibe, right? And what happens there and how you interact with guests, maybe your decor and all those things kind of all speak to something. So responding in that way is also important. It's important to have that kind of that voice follow through. So understanding where you're at in terms of how you interact with a guest and the things that you say. So in the case of this hotel, this is a hotel that's in Hawaii. So they want to start probably start and end with aloha, right? So we want to start this. We want to start with that intro. So as you create an intro, it's really about like, what are the things that I want to say as I start this? And it's not obviously the same every time. You don't want to have the same intro that you have on a negative review as a positive review, and you really don't want that to be too canned. But you want that intro to have enough commonality to it to kind of set the stage for your voice. And then as you address issues, those issues could be, as you address them, they could be something very formal. It could be something a little more playful, obviously depending on the tone of the review. But those things are, it's really important to capture that. But probably even more important, I know this probably sounds crazy, but write this stuff down. You know, create a Google document, maybe a Word document that can be shared between the people that are making these, and then socialize this information around so that you guys that you have something consistent that you're saying about issues, and you have a consistent way of saying it. And I think that what's interesting about some of this stuff is that we get into this space sometimes where we sort of can these responses, we can an intro, we kind of can like a centerpiece of like, it's like, you know, thank you for your feedback, it's through your feedback that we get better, like that kind of sentiment. It can be expressed, but in different ways, and maybe either through your own voice or you know, circumstantially based on the contents of the review. And then I think the big parts of this are, once I set my voice, I'm actually talking to the guest that wrote the review. So I'm creating service recovery, and I'm trying to like help that guest understand where we're at, and that doesn't always mean apologizing. It doesn't always mean, you know, really kind of coming at it from a weak space. It could be, hey, this is our policy. We do this because of this and because of this, right? And then there's those other situations where we want to really reach out to the guest and create service recovery. And I think a sincere effort there also speaks to a guest reading that response. And so I think some of those things go hand in hand, but you also have to be aware that someone else is reading this besides this person. So it could be hundreds or thousands of guests that are reading this, especially how people search for reviews. A lot of times they go to the negative first. So a lot of your negative responses could be read more than anything else. So having the right tone there and having something that really is sincere and not fake sincere. So, I mean, I know how to do fake sincere.
And just to jump in there, Jason, you know, and if you were part of the workshops that we conducted a few months earlier with review response, you know, I spoke to something called the Amazon effect. So for those hotels out there that are really just banking on their reputation, well, we get 5-star reviews, 4-star reviews all the time. We really don't need to worry about the negative reviews. What has happened now is guests will look for that negative experience. We are pessimistic in the sense of, I know this could 90% of the time everything's going right, but what happens if my stay goes wrong? So you could be just buried with 5 or 4-star reviews, but they will seek out a 1-star review, and guess what? There is a magnifying glass on that negative response. So you have to really, really concentrate and put your best customer service skills forward, because they will find that, and they will essentially have a first impression of how your property handles issues if they were to arrive.
Yeah. And believe me, I you know, and you guys, I'm sure everyone on this call has seen responses that are just that are a kind of a blow off. It's a thanks for your feedback kind of response. So speak to the issues. It's really important. But I think there's also this great opportunity, like Ryan was talking about with the review examples before, where you can highlight parts of your property. I think it's also a great space to set expectations, because there are elements inside of your hotel that could be creating friction for guests that are not, you can't change those. It could be a little set of steps. It could be how, you know, the timing, like when you close your pool. It's these things that create friction, that cause people to maybe write a negative review, but those aren't things that are going to change. But if the expectation was set ahead of time, then it's not even really an issue. It would never even be brought up, because they know that the pool closes at 10 o'clock. So it's those kinds of things, I think, that are really important to detail, and make sure that those policies are really clear. I think pet policies are big. What time the breakfast starts and ends, things like that are important to detail in this space. And social media is also a great place to put all of that as well, just as a side note. But I think this is also a great space to also detail out renovation. If you have renovations coming up even, I think it's not a bad place to say that, where if somebody, let's say somebody is talking about your limited parking, it could be a place to say, you know, we have renovations coming up, there could be even less parking, right? It's not even bad to like just you know, kind of throw some of those pieces in there, but also at the same time, having that information available, and maybe even when the renovation is going to be over, somebody mentions the fact that there's a lot of noise because of a renovation going on, and hey, sorry for the noise, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. Renovations will end on, you know, November 15th. So setting expectations for incoming guests.
Yeah, these notes that Jason are talking about were really a lifeline during the pandemic, because what happened was when travelers started going across country, right? We're based out of Florida here. If I was a traveler going to California during that time, I really had no expectations of what I was going to walk into. So these were really a great place to set those expectations, and did a fantastic job. And the hotels that are continuing this right now are doing a great job of, like you said, some things that you're never not going to be able to change. Location, maybe noise, aspects that you just know are those things that bug you in the guest experience. You're kind of blunting that impact there when it comes to your reputation by responding in that way.
And one last thing I want to bring up too, when you get in again, so now we're kind of like we're establishing our voice, we're establishing the policies, we're talking about renovations, we're doing all these things, and we're talking about ways of establishing our voice and making sure that we respond. I think along with that comes a quality check of that response. So little things get messed up as you start to write, or if you're writing quickly, words get misspelled sometimes words can change, and obviously there's different ways of writing things. I can't stress this enough. There is nothing more damaging than having a damaging review, having a guest upset, and then writing a response that has misspellings in it and grammar errors. It makes them feel less important. It makes the whole thing worse. And someone reading that is then really like, what is going on at this hotel? So I know it sounds like a minor thing, but it is a really important place. So make sure that if you're doing it, maybe socialize what you've written with another party. Let them see it, especially on the really critical responses. And definitely use any kind of spell check or grammar check that you have. But more than one set of eyes is a great thing in this case.
Yes, absolutely. It should be a team effort here. Get a couple review response champions. And I don't have an exercise slide per se for this, but a great exercise would to be if you've got maybe somebody that you're looking to help you with the review response. These notes, like Jason said, socialize these notes, put them somewhere where that person can read it, and then have them write a review and see if they're matching that voice. These notes should be just as detailed that if somebody were to leave that property, somebody could come in and write that authentic, consistent voice that the hotel has had over time. So this is super, super important. So recapping again: response, introduction, signature, and tone. This is something we ask our review response partners all the time. What's the tone? What's the voice and feel that you want at your hotel? A lot of hotels have a good sense of what that is, but might not be reflected on places like their review responses. Set expectations for future guests. We already stressed how important that is through general notes, policy updates, and renovations if you're going through them, or any sort of closures or stuff like that. And then quality check your responses, right? Designate a few review response champions to audit any sort of plan responses if you have the opportunity and you have the bandwidth too. I do want to go ahead and launch another poll right now. Again, this could just could spur some conversation of where this last half of the masterclass go. So what right now is the biggest challenge when responding to guest feedback for you? So is it finding the time, finding the right thing to say, finding the people to do it, or all the above? And finding the right people to do it, obviously we've had some some historic industry staffing shortages as of late. So this might be an issue for one or a couple hotels. Obviously we saw from our first poll that finding the time also is a challenge. But I'll give everyone a chance. This one looks a little bit more democratic as far as the answers here. So I'll go ahead and share the results. Finding the right thing to say, and all the above actually tied for number one. So we'll make sure to kind of speak to these as we talk through the rest of the masterclass. But let me go ahead and jump into leveraging data analytics. So obviously with all this guest feedback, especially TripAdvisor, which has a character limit, you've got a lot of data and analytics there. How can we use that data in our responses in the future. So Jason, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you one final time and kind of talk us through that, because I think we think once that review response is posted, it's over, right? But there's a lot more that you can do with this, and there's ways that you can optimize the next responses that you're going to be writing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important to this goes into all the things that we're talking about. And I saw a lot of people put on like finding the right thing to say. And I think what we say and how we address issues is really important, especially if they're issues that are happening over and over. So there are certain types of issues I think that happen that happen, over and over. What's interesting is that because we see so many reviews, we've obviously responded to millions of reviews at this point, or over a million reviews. And when you get into the elements of it, of negative reviews specifically, it's typically something has gone wrong, service recovery was attempted and failed, right? And now it's full bloom anger. Then there's the other stuff that is things were great, but then there's this one thing, right? So there's there's a combination of those things. But if you boil them down into these elements, and in this case, we look at them like room, service, and facility. So we kind of take all of the elements that are in each of those categories to really drill into the guest's experience. And the reason why we do this is because we want to identify if there are things that are happening to multiple guests, then this is no longer this kind of one-off scenario. And I've said this before, I think there's always this inclination in management to want things to be a one-off. And when we talk to our staff, a lot of times we're like, hey, what happened in this situation? And they go, well, that guest was crazy, and this thing only happened one time. And and then the inclination is to be like, yeah, good. Well, let's make sure that doesn't happen again. But then if you can take a length of time and you can look and see, are there things that are happening regularly at my property that are not good? And if there are, how do I identify those things and how do I make them better? So I think it's really trying to find these things that, and I think it's equally important to see what's going right, by the way. But I think those things together really show you what are the things that a typical guest is going to experience, and how can I really drill in and make these things better. But it also could inform me if I have issues. So let's say I have issues in cleanliness, and those issues in cleanliness they happen here and there, but I've been able to identify what it is that's causing that. And it could be something simple like there's a stain, it's a stain inside of a bathtub or something. It could be something that I know what it is, and I know that this is an ongoing issue that we're working to fix. So there could be already a type of response that's ready for that type of deal, that it's not dirty, it is a stain, kind of a thing. Not excusing it, but explaining it. Or it could be something that is now a trend that suddenly has started to happen, where like you can see in this case where it's like I suddenly had a cleanliness issue that then was fixed. So my negative cleanliness sentiment was going up, my positive cleanliness sentiment was going down, right? And then you see it switch right here. But understanding that, so knowing when I've fixed an issue is also equally important. So it's leveraging all of this data. And so a lot of this is textual data. So it's like paragraphs of text. And so it's about how do I pull all these little elements out of it. So if your brand has something that does this, great. We have something, obviously you can see it that does this, but using a tool like this really helps you to really kind of see fact from fiction and understand really what's happening. And at the end of the day, like, what is our product as hoteliers? It's guest experience. We have a physical plant, we have people, we have all these things that we manage, but really it's guest experience that is our product. And a positive guest experience is what creates more positive guest experiences. And we kind of stay on that track. So constant iteration and making things better is what this data is really all about.
Yeah, I think a great example of this would be our breakfast, right? It is one of the, as Jason said, we've responded to 1 million+ reviews. Breakfast is still one of the top things that people talk about, right? So if we're noticing a negative trend on breakfast, with our review response, what we can try to do is the next time, and we're actually going to those reviews and maybe they're complaining about the variety of breakfast. Now, all of a sudden in our review responses, when somebody talks about how great our breakfast is, we don't just thank them and say, hey, we're proud to serve this amazing breakfast. We actually talk about what's in our breakfast. We maybe mention a couple items here and there. And what we're doing is we're setting expectations for the next time. So when that guest is reading that review and they might not like, they might not like the variety, we've at least explained to them through at least one channel, hopefully also on our social media, as Jason mentioned as well, but we've at least explained through one channel of the expectations of what they're going to get when they come on property. And that's how you can use review response in these data trends. And that's obviously a negative situation, but there's plenty of positive ones as well, where you can identify patterns and trends and really showcase this on channels like your social media or website. A great example at the very beginning of connecting the dots. When someone gives you that blank canvas, what are you speaking about? What are the most important things at your property and your competitive advantages?
Yeah, absolutely. This is just another look at that, another look at these types of tags, breaking them down and really trying to understand them, seeing if there's something that's just recent, something that is ongoing. And I think all of this information is the information that guests are telling us. The other thing you have to think about in this is that our guests don't, as a whole, they don't leave us a lot of reviews. If you think about all the guests that have stayed at your property, right? So I think industry-wide, we're under 2%. Certain brands get higher. Obviously, destination locations get a little bit higher. But you're talking about a really small percentage. So also the other thing I would think about when you see this data is that this didn't happen to 2 people. This was 2 mentions, but it didn't happen to 2 people. This could be hundreds of people that this same thing happened to. So really understanding that, and the things that you're saying, I think, and I think guests understand that when they read something negative, they immediately put themselves in that guest position. So getting this information out, understanding it, highlighting it, making sure that you've got a plan for it. And then like Ryan said, using this information to also inform your guests and craft responses so that you have information for the people that are writing the responses, and that you're also passing information to the guests who wrote it and future guests about the ways you're addressing these issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all, and those notes are a perfect place that we just talked about in the last section. Those notes are a perfect place to highlight those. I mean, I go back here to, prior to COVID-19, when bed bugs, right? You think about some of these hoteliers that as soon as that bed bugs hit TripAdvisor or hit Google reviews, the protocol that went in place from a review response standpoint, that really should be, some of these issues or patterns that we're seeing, that urgency really needs to be felt on a lot of these negative trends if we're identifying them. So let's go ahead and recap again. Highlight positive trends and topics. Showcase what guests love most about your hotel or brand. We're going to have an exercise here in a minute that I think does a great job of demonstrating that. Identify potential risk and resolve issues. Evaluate aspects of the guest experience that need improvement. Jason did a great job of talking about that. And then implement fixes and measure changes, right? So that breakfast example that we had, if you're not seeing you're seeing breakfast trends, negative trends, you're responding, you're telling them what's happening, you're still seeing that trend, try switching it up, telling people you got gluten-free options or try something else. And then, but you have to measure those changes. You can't just make those operational changes and see what happens. You have to measure them. That's why, looking at this data is so important. So last exercise number 2, we did this in the workshops last month. Great example of this. Imagine you're at a property and you're working the night shift. Somebody comes in and they say, sell me on your hotel, right? You probably have a spiel. You know what your hotel offers that's better than the hotel next door or in your market. Well, write those 3 things down on a piece of paper and then go to these sites that you see kind of tickering at the bottom here. And I want you to check off how many times those 3 things are mentioned in the first page of your feed. Sometimes we go there and none of the three are shown. Sometimes it's all three. But if that's the real story that you're trying to sell, how well of a job are you doing it on these sites? And review response is a great opportunity. Make sure it's relevant. Obviously, we're not going to talk about the greatness of our breakfast as someone's talking about our pool. But it has to be woven in here. If this is your competitive advantage, guests have to know about it. So this is a great exercise that I would encourage you to do after this masterclass. So in saying that, this is the screenshot, folks, right? So if you've got a second, we are going to be sending out a copy of this as well. But this is that 10-step review response action plan that we talked about. This is something that our team of professional review response writers do here at Travel Media Group, and you can implement it because it's so important to be impactful. Do not be the hotel that just does review response. Be the hotel that impacts the traveler's journey with their review response. So, in saying that, it is this time of year, Black Friday deal. Want to let everyone know what we are doing is for those that are interested in signing up in a new Respond and Resolve review response package. That is our responding to review platform. We've responded to over 1 million reviews. We are doing a Black Friday deal, get social view free for 2023. So that's posting, analytics, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we are also at some point going to have TikTok also integrated into our platform. So if you're able to secure that now, it's not going to cost you anything. So Jason, any follow-up on this in the masterclass today?
I think just what we've just reiterating some of the things we've said all day today, but this goes with every part of being a hotelier, and that we're in the hospitality business. And just remember that guest experience is what this is about. And when we don't do what our guests expect, in a negative way, that we sincerely, seek out service recovery. And that is the key to all of this. There's no trick. It really is about being sincere and trying to to help this guest understand that we want to serve them again. And and hopefully we do. Hopefully that is our feeling. But yeah, this is something that we really love, and we have the luxury, by the way, of not operating your hotel, right? Of just seeing all this information and being able to like see it from this view. So I think that's why we love partnering with hotels, is because we have this sort of view, and we definitely have a perspective that you might not see, because we're just looking at it objectively from the data standpoint. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in learning more, I mean, we've got a passion, we've got a team dedicated. So I know one of the poll questions asked, can't find the right person to respond to these reviews. We've done 1 million of them. Text TMG to that number for more details on this Black Friday deal. So at this point, we'll go ahead and answer it. I know we've had a few questions throughout, so I want to go ahead and open those up. Okay, so Brandon asks, what about using templates as a place to start for a response? So our team doesn't use templates. I would just say, another great exercise when you're responding to reviews is think about when someone comes to you with either a compliment or a problem at the front desk, and you've got other guests behind them, and you're responding to that by saying, hey, sorry that this happened to you. You're not going to say the same exact thing to that next guest if they can hear you. That's exactly what review response is, right? You're trying to resolve issues online in the public forum. So responding in a templated way, or using maybe other companies that use templates, that's what that sounds like. It sounds like you're kind of a robot up there trying to solve issues the same exact way as if you were face to face with them. So I would be very, very careful with using templates as a place to start. Jason, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that fine line between a template and a format. So So we've been talking a lot about notes, and we've been talking about ways of sort of collating information so that you have the best possible way to make responses. I think that is a way more effective place to be, where I have information to create responses to the issues that I'm reading, rather than just that same thing over and over again. And I think it's very transparent, like you said, Ryan. It's a very transparent when you look at a bunch of reviews in a row, and and that's how it's looked at. So it's like, if I look at your last 10 reviews, and if they have the same intro, if they say the same thing basically over and over and over again, here's my template for positive, here's my template for negative, it's going to be shown. And studies have actually shown that it is actually worse in guests' mind if you do something like that, rather than if you had just left it blank.
Yeah, and it's just also for positive, right? I mean, what is that teaching your guests? You know, we're trying to encourage travelers to leave feedback. If a traveler comes onto your TripAdvisor and they're seeing the same templated response for a 5-star review, that's not encouragement for them to leave feedback. So great question. Sarah asked, what about reviews on Facebook? Jason, I'll actually let you take this one.
Yeah, reviews on Facebook or Facebook recommendations, it can be tricky, because it's basically recommend or not recommend, and it can be pretty tricky, because as you make those responses, this is the space where your response actually can be, somebody can like that response, somebody can comment on that response. So it's actually a little more of a tricky space than the rest of our review sites, because of it being like regular social media. That recommendation, you know, if depending on how you respond, it could be met with a comment or a response to your response that could be pretty damaging. So definitely, if you're doing that, make sure that those responses, you take a really good hard look at those, knowing that they could be commented on, but also make sure that you have alerts set up for comments on those, so you can capture those too.
Yeah, Facebook can be a slippery slope. You know, really, you think about it, almost every post can even turn into a review. So, and even every comment, you're typically, if somebody's involving you in a conversation, they're commenting, they're tagging, they're sharing something and getting you involved, that is a review response. That's why it's so critical to have like a social listening tool like Social View that we offer, so you can be a part of that conversation and actually respond. One of the first tips in this masterclass, right? Notifications and making sure you're a part of that conversation. So pretty great, really great questions. I know we got a lot more. Chris, Scott, sorry we weren't able to get to you guys today. I did want to go ahead and share my contact information if we had any further questions about the masterclass. This is my direct line. Email me as well. We have all of our, if you missed our social media masterclass and you want to cover that, all on our YouTube page. So you will be receiving a copy of this, but you can find all of our educational content on our YouTube page. We are going to continue for our last webinar of 2022, top 5 review response trends for hotels and hotel groups as we get into 2023. Before I wrap up, I will launch one last poll.